Hello. This is Pouring from an Already Empty Cup: Civil Unrest, Pre-Existing Racial Trauma, and Teaching During a Pandemic. I'm Christina Rios Kelly, and this is my Teacher Action Research Capstone. I had one research question and one sub-question. How does psychological stress affect the health of educators? And do stressors affect the health of white educators and non-white educators in the same manner? The purpose of this study was to determine if psychological stress affects the health of educators, and if it is proven to do so, if the same stress and stressors affect the health of white and non-white educators in the same manner. As a non-white educator myself, and as a person who has a lifetime of pre-existing racial trauma, I felt increased pressure teaching throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, not only because we were in the midst of a pandemic, but also because the country was experiencing great civil unrest due to the multiple shootings and murders of unarmed Black citizens that were caught on video and ultimately played on the news ad nauseum. I was concerned that the stress and pain and depression I was feeling could possibly be being felt on a deeper level than that of my white colleagues. However, I had no direct way of asking or exploring the concept. The participants were 10 full-time educators employed at the same school where I was completing my practicum 2. 8 were white identifying and 2 were Black identifying. The years of teaching ranged from first year to over 26 years in education. All were teaching fully virtually, and all within an elementary school that was located within a district that is over 90% African American and 100% free lunch eligible. I had hoped to include all 24 full-time members of the teaching staff. However, I was only able to receive back 10 surveys. Within my literature review, I was able to isolate 4 main themes: that teaching is stressful even during a normal year, that emotional and physical exhaustion leads to teacher burnout, that self-care and coping methods are not explicitly taught to educators and overall lacking in the field of education, and COVID-19 brought a new set of challenges and stresses to education that had not formerly been there. To collect my data, participants were sent the same survey via Google Forms. The survey was broken up into 8 primary areas of concern: professional duties and workload, physical health, mental and emotional health, coping, pre-existing trauma, sleep, teaching support, and teaching and learning struggles. The survey also allowed for the participants to write their own answers in to answer the question of ethnicity and their email address. And then they were able to write short to long answers however they would like to the questions of what do you need in order to be successful this school year, and ultimately what do you wish you could explain to society about how it feels to be a teacher in this context right now. In order to increase validity, I focused on confirmability and credibility. Direct quotes were sent to the participants that I quoted to ensure that their words were not taken out of context. Google Forms allowed none of my personal biases to interfere with my data collection, as it was not only a third party, but also an algorithm that sorted my data, and that included in the literature review you will find pieces that ultimately explain that teaching during the COVID-19 pandemic can be a team-building activity for educators. Of course, this is not what I'm seeking to explain or prove, but in order to allow voices of dissent into the conversation, they are included within my literature review. The results of this data showed that as the workload of educators increased, their physical health was impacted. The majority of educators who responded chose the same general months, September and August, of being the most detrimental. What is most telling, I believe, is that September was chosen over and over again as a primary month that physical health suffered, that workload increased, that pivoting happened. However, the district was not considering going to in-person learning in September. And by September, educators had already been teaching virtually and had been fully trained on platforms from anywhere from 1 to 2 months. citing September as the highest month of stress and the overall month that physical health was so greatly impacted leads me to believe that although the workload was, yes, likely increasing, that what educators were perhaps unknowingly reported was an increase in their overall trauma being created in real time. Perhaps along the same lines of possible cognitive dissonance, the same number of educators who reported having no pre-existing trauma or having pre-existing trauma but not having it exacerbated by the pandemic also reported that they were learning new ways to cope. 10% additionally would report that they were learning new ways to cope and would appreciate assistance in doing so. If the same number of educators are reporting that they have no trauma or that their pre-existing trauma is not being exacerbated, and yet they are looking for new ways to cope, one has to wonder if that means that either they did not recognize the pre-existing trauma in their lives prior to the pandemic, or instead were having theirs built for them, trauma in real time, as a result of teaching throughout this period. My recommendations are based on my research from my literature review, as well as direct quotes and requests from my participant survey. Administrators need to allow lesson planning time to stay as lesson planning time. Districts need to scale back the amount of professional development they are requiring and only require what is contractually necessary. As well, professional development should be tailored to specific groups. Districts need to make it safer and easier to report unhealthy work environments, whether it be emotional health or physical health, and there should be no retribution for anyone who reports. Districts should give all staff access to meditation, counseling, and physical fitness apps at low or no cost, as well as monetarily incentivize the use of them. Additionally, administrators need to receive training that will allow them to recognize mental and emotional health issues, including but not limited to depression and suicidal ideation within their staff. It is my hope that this research will be continued and done in the future, ideally over a longer period of time than I was able to, and with a larger participant pool, including a greater number of non-white educators. I believe that in-depth interviews, in addition to just surveys, as well as a pre- and post-study questionnaire, would be extremely helpful in this line of research and would ultimately help determine whether or not interventions were successful. Possible interventions that I would recommend would be the use of meditation, counseling, and physical fitness apps. Finally, I was able to give my non-participants, the 14 educators who never turned their surveys back into me, the same access to information and assistance as I did to my actual participants. I did not do this to gather more information or in the hopes that I would guilt them into turning in their surveys, but rather I was receiving very sad, worrisome text messages, and I had many personal phone calls and conversations with educators who were teetering on the edge of something very worrisome and overall steeped in depression. In the future, if this research is carried out, I would like to believe that future researchers would extend the same courtesy to other educators as I was able to in mine. I know that science does not necessarily back up courtesy and kindness, but I also know that what we are doing right now and the way that we are treating people who are living through this period right now ultimately tells the world what kind of human beings we are. And as educators, I hope that as we know better, we continue to do better. Thank you so much for your time.